This is In Character. I'm your host, Gerard Robinson, Vice President for Education at the Advanced Studies in Culture Foundation. Tonight we have people who are not only educators, but these are people who are interested in public policy, so much so that they actually decided to run for office. Some of them are elected officials, some of them ran for office and did not win, but at the core, every single one of them is an educator. And as we say here in Culture, educators matter because they do a lot for not only the culture of education, but really creating an ecology for us to think differently about teaching and learning, about politics, and about how we help families and communities. And so with that, I want to thank everyone for joining me tonight and say welcome to your first event with me at In Character. So what we're going to do is a round robin. This will give you an opportunity to introduce yourself, tell us your first and last name, where you're located, the kind of work you do, and then after we do our first round, I'll open up our first question. So I'm going to go to the person with the very fancy mic, Jeffrey, and we'll start.
Hi, my name is Dr. Jeffrey Allen Hinton. I'm a teacher in the Clark County School District in Las Vegas, Nevada. It's the 5th largest district in the country. I teach U.S. history at the Advanced Technologies Academy.
Thank you. And I've spent a lot of time in Vegas spending money to invest into the taxpayers' coffers. So I'll leave it at that on that side. Let's go to Kristen. Let's go to Christine. Sorry.
Christine, yes. Hi, everybody. I'm really honored to be here. I'm Christine Marsh. I'm in my 29th year of teaching. I teach at a public middle school in Scottsdale, Arizona, and I'm an Arizona state senator. So I go directly from school every morning and dash my way over to the state capitol. And like I said, I'm really very honored to be here.
Thank you. For the Arizona legislature, is it full-time or part-time?
It is full-time when we're in session, but it's a working person's legislature. So they expect that people will have like other jobs. So we are in session from early January until we pass the budget, which will be sometime likely in May. And then pretty much off other than any special meetings or anything like that.
Good to know. Bob, your story.
Hi, I'm Bob Williams. I live in Juneau, Alaska, born and raised in Palmer, Alaska. And I am currently the acting CEO for the National Network of State Teachers of the Year, NSTOY. And I was the Alaska 2009 Teacher of the Year and ran for Alaska Lieutenant Governor in 2014.
Thank you for joining us. And as you can see, for those of you who will watch this, he's got the brightest background. It's actually snowing where he is. Thank you for joining us. Sharon, your story.
Yes, thank you. It's great to be with you. I'm Sharon Gallagher Fishbein. I'm a National Board Certified Teacher. I taught in Utah. This is my 42nd year in public education in some space or another. I ran for president of the Utah Education Association and served two terms in that role. And now I serve on multiple nonprofit boards in the education space. And it's great to be here.
Thank you for joining us. Let's go to you, Christopher.
Yes, thanks. So my name is Chris Pulis, and I am a high school Spanish teacher. I also serve as an instructional leader for the humanities. So I split my day teaching half of the day, and half of the day I work with adults. In 2017, I ran for and was elected to the Southington Town Council. That's my hometown. And I was reelected in 2019. And it's been quite an interesting experience.
Same question I raised with Christine. What's the requirement for your position? Full-time, part-time, 12 months, 6 months?
It's a 12-month position, but it's part-time. It's a volunteer position, so there's no compensation. Okay. We have two town meetings a month, but then there's subcommittee meetings and other things that happen throughout the day.
So all of you have not only experience in the classroom, but you also have experience in public office or running for public office. I had a chance earlier in my career. I was a fifth grade school teacher, became very interested in public policy. I worked as a full-time staffer for a state senator in California, Bill Leonard. This was in the early 1990s. He was a Republican. I also worked for State Representative Mary Christian, in fact, who passed last year. She was a Democrat. So I've worked for Democrats and Republicans. And as a staffer, you know, you do three things. Number one, you're a blocker. So you kind of stop people who don't need to get to your boss too quickly. But you also make sure that people who need to can. Number two, you're an encourager because you often know some of the items sometimes better than your boss because you have to read more. And then third, you're the person who really has got to make sure that the information gets to, as Christine shared, the crossover part. So I appreciate the work that you do. And I didn't realize until I left California, because California is a full-time legislature where your only job is a legislator. I moved to Virginia and found out that people actually had real jobs, as they said. And so it's really good to see people who are doing dual career work. So the first question for me is, what attracted you as an educator to decide to put your hat into electoral politics? We'll start with you, Christine. In fact, Holly, can you join now?
Yes, can you hear me?
Excellent. So go ahead and tell us
Okay.
about yourself and what you do.
My name is Holly Beaufey. I'm the principal of the W.D. and Mary Baker Smith Career Center, which is an extension of the high schools in Lafayette Parish, Louisiana, where students come to work on careers. So they work on getting industry-based certifications. My elected work is on the State Board of Elementary and Secondary Education. I'm actually serving in my third term on the board. I first ran in 2011.
So you probably know a guy named Paul Pastrick.
I do know Paul. Paul was actually the superintendent when I was the state teacher of the year.
I know Paul well. We were original members of Chiefs for Change, and I was also born in Lake Charles. So I know a few things about Louisiana. So good to have you on board.
Well, Lake Charles was part of my Bessie district. I should have been talking to you about getting your family to vote for me.
We'll talk offline about this because I have an aunt who's a teacher in Lake Charles. That's a whole nother story. What made you decide to say, hey, I want to throw my bid into the electoral ring to influence education?
Because I realized that I wasn't going to be able to sleep at night if I wasn't doing everything possible for kids. Like that, I was going to lose sleep either way, running or not running, but that I thought I would end up losing more sleep by not running, by having those restless nights. And just, Arizona's at the bottom of pretty much everything in terms of education funding, class size, highest class size, et cetera, et cetera. And I decided that our kids deserve better than they're getting. And I was going to get in there and try to do what I could to make their lives better.
In Arizona, when you run for office, is it partisan, nonpartisan in terms of who can vote for you in the primary and general election? And do you have to raise a ton of money to run for your seat?
It is partisan. Obviously, in the general election, in my district has a advantage with the other party. So they do cross over. And yes, I had to raise a lot of money. This is a very, very competitive district. Out of the 30 legislative districts in Arizona, there are only about 4 that are what we would call kind of purple. So campaigning and teaching at the same time was quite challenging. And I did lose the first time. I ran in 2018 and fell 267 votes short out of 90,000+. Ran again, and it was almost exactly flipped, won by just under 500 votes. So here I am.
Nice. I see Jeffrey shaking his head a lot as you were speaking. Talk to us about your story.
Yeah, it sounds like Christine and I have a similar story, except that she won. But I was the 2014 Nevada Teacher of the Year, And like her, I wanted to capitalize that into doing something positive for education, positive for kids. Nevada is towards the bottom of national rankings of educational achievement. Go on and on about that. But yeah, I mean, it's a challenge. We have a citizen legislature. We meet biannually, although they are, there is campaigns right now to change that. But yeah, it's tough. It's very difficult being a full-time teacher, a full-time dad, full-time husband, and trying to run a campaign with all of the fundraising involved. But Christine, you know, she knows what it's like to try to knock doors in 115, 120 degree heat. It takes everything out of you. I'm going to tell you, I'm a former Marine, and campaigning for office is by far the most difficult thing I've ever done. And it's tough because there's no second place. And it's tough when you put the time, the energy, the effort, the resources, you put everything into running a race to lose. So, but it was a learning experience. So I cherish it.
Christine had a small gap. What was your, was large gap, small gap in terms of the outcome?
Yeah, I mean, I ran in 2014. That was President Obama's midterm election. And I live in a very, it's actually pretty evenly divided. And this was a time, you know, there was, I mean, actually it was a blowout throughout the state. We had, the Democrat Party had lost every statewide elected office except for one. Secretary of State was a Republican. She retained her seat. Everyone else lost. We even had significant members, chairs of committees, et cetera, lose their seats in that election. It was a tough race for Democrats.
And thanks for putting it into a national context, because people often overlook the spillover effect of what happens in the off-election cycle and what that will mean for state politics. So thanks for bringing that up. So since we're still in the West, Sharon, talk to us about your story.
Well, my story began with Bob Williams sitting at a table when we were 2009 Teachers of the Year, the famous glasses coming off my head, landing on the table. The reason for that was that I was extremely frustrated by the fact that there were not a lot of teacher voices, teacher experts in the policies that were being made for students and obviously affecting teachers. And so I decided that I would use my STOY experience as a launching pad for running for state office for the Utah Education Association. And part of my passion around that was that I knew that teachers in the Teachers Association were all about kids and learning. And so I wanted to repurpose the work of the Utah Education Association around a student-centered agenda. And I spent 6 years doing that. And that meant lobbying the legislature and being a credible, honest broker for policies that I knew would work. But for me, it was the absence of the teacher voice that pushed me into putting my hat in the ring. So
same question in terms of what Jeffrey said and Christine, part-time legislature, full-time,
It is a citizen legislature. It is part-time. There is a 6-week window where they are in session. So I was on Capitol Hill for that full amount of time. And then, of course, building relationships in between session became critical in order to advance the agenda for teachers and kids. So essentially, my job was a political beast. It was like herding cats at times, but it was, in essence, just all politics.
Got it. Well, since you mentioned Bob's name, let's just go over to you, Bob. Talk to us about Alaska and your decision.
Yeah, there was a time early in my career when I think there's someone wrote an editorial in the paper criticizing teachers for having cars that might be less than 4 years old, and like maybe they were greedy. And I was really angry at that. And I told my wife, I'm like, if you want to live in another state, that's fine. I was born and raised here, but I don't. If we're not appreciated, I'll go somewhere else. And my wife decided she wanted to stay in Alaska, so we stayed. But then the next time something happened was it was after I was the Alaska 2009 Teacher of the Year, and there was some more criticism kind of coming from policymakers, elected officials towards teachers, and it really bothered me. But that Teacher of the Year experience really drilled in the importance of stepping into a challenge. And I was like, well, if I'm Lieutenant Governor, there'll be a different governor. and so I announced for Lieutenant Governor in 2013 before anyone had declared for governor, and started running. And people would say, well, who do you think is going to be the governor? Because they run separately. And I said, I don't know, but I'm going to strengthen the ticket and there'll be a change. And it was 2 years of my life. And I'll just have to say, you know, Jeffrey, you were talking about how exhausting it is. It is, I think people don't really appreciate just how demanding it is on your family, on your spouse, on your life. It was a full two years of my life that was, and sometimes calling 8 hours straight, asking for money, and sometimes having a fair amount and sometimes not. But my kids could like rattle off my talking points because they heard it so much. And it was just a really, it was a great experience, because after I did lose my primary, and I will have to say that's a dark moment when you realize 2 years of your life and you didn't accomplish what you set out to do, and you're sitting there with your family and you literally feel like a loser because you lost. But what I didn't realize is that, and I had some challenges. There's a governor candidate that dropped out of the race to run as lieutenant governor that had been in the Senate for 10 years, and that just became much more challenging. Mm-hmm. But I ran a very positive campaign, and actually the person who beat me ended up having to drop out too, because all the polling showed that there was an independent, a Republican, and a Democrat, and the only way to make a change was for the Republican and the independent to join together, a unity ticket. And so when that happened, I endorsed it. I did a town hall on education. I strongly promoted it. I thought my campaign would be over then, but it wasn't. And that ticket won by just a few thousand votes. Wow. And so I was looking for a change in the executive branch, and I kind of feel like I won by proxy, because there was a change in the executive branch, and I had formed a good relationship with both candidates, that the governor and lieutenant governor. So I have to be reminded that I lost, because when I think back on it, I don't really feel like I lost.
That's a smart way of actually understanding politics. You won without winning,
Mm-hmm.
but won in despite of losing because of the influence you had. Good for you. Let's jump across the country to Connecticut. We've spent some time on the western part. Tell us your story, and then we'll go to Holly.
Sure. So I have a little bit of a different story. When I was in college, I went to the University of Richmond solely because they had a major in leadership studies. Mm-hmm. And my whole plan was to get involved in public service. And I found myself working on Capitol Hill. And I worked for 2 members of Congress, and learned really quick that entry-level work on Capitol Hill wasn't that fulfilling. And so I looked around. I looked at the people that I admired, and I said, well, people typically serve their country. These successful public servants have served their country. And at that time, I wasn't going to join the Army, but I joined the Peace Corps. And I spent 2.5 years in Central America and learned how to speak Spanish. But really, I think the most defining moment of that was that I had this epiphany that I could serve my community. I could be a public servant in education. And so when I got out, I was certified quickly in an alternate certification program and became a Spanish teacher. And it was in my career, when I became the state teacher of the year for Connecticut, that I was thrown into a role where I had to advocate on behalf of 50,000 teachers in Connecticut. And it was trial by fire. Thank goodness for the Chief Council of State School Officers. The program really prepared us for that role. That year of honor was a training year. And from 10 years from my year of honor in 2017 is when I decided I was going to run for public office. And so it came back, like my original interests came back to me in my 17th year of teaching. And there was a lot of things that caused me to want to run. You know, it was 2017. We had such a positive experience as state teachers of the year working with the Obama administration. We had personal relationships with Secretary Duncan, and that all seemed had come to an end. And so I took on a run, actually. I was on a run. I said, well, I could do a few things. I can protest for 4 years. I could dig a hole in the sand and put my head in it and cover it up for 4 years, or I could get engaged and involved to try to make some positive change. And I looked around, and I had young kids in public school in my hometown. I had my parents that live in my hometown, and they're senior citizens on a fixed income. And so I said, I'm gonna go for this. I'm gonna try to run for public office. And I was like this odd candidate because I wasn't involved in town committee politics. I just came out. My high school history teacher was on the town committee. I called him up and I said, how do I get involved? And he advocated for me and got me nominated, and it worked out. I'll say this about the campaigning. It is tough. And when you're a high school teacher, no one trains you on you have to figure it out. And raising money is something that we really don't do as teachers. And teachers are nice people. And I found out quickly, like the world of politics, even within your own party, like it's just a different tone and a way that people treat each other. And again, like it was trial by fire, but I survived, and I'm glad I did it.
And it's good to hear you share the local context, because so much of education is local. Something Temple Neal said decades ago, and so you're now in Connecticut doing your work. Let's go to the South and talk to you, Holly, about your story and why you decided to throw your hat in the ring.
I would say that a lot of it is connected to my state teacher of the year experience as well. I, as a state teacher of the year, didn't observe a lot of people really advocating for students. And I think back to our experiences, and I think it was Mary Beth Blegan who got really serious with us and said, don't whine, do something. If there's a problem, then you need to do something about it and fix it. And I really took that to heart and felt that if people weren't going to make a seat at the table for me, then I was going to make a seat at the table for myself. And fortunately, it was really successful. I think something that's been really important to my journey too, though, is the people who have tapped me, so to speak. So the people who said, have you really thought about this? This is something that maybe you should think about? And I can't say that I would have done it if I wouldn't have had people to kind of make that push. And when I reflect on, the impetus for this conversation, I think it's important for us to be saying that to other educators. Had people not encouraged me to do it, I'm not sure I would have had the courage to make it happen. And so I think we should really be doing that for and with each other.
Interesting. One of the takeaways from what all of you have said is how important either your teacher of the year experience was to you making a decision, or the fact that you looked around and said, wait a minute, who's advocating for children or advocating for families? Now, some of us would think that you already have advocates for children. It would either be your teacher association. I mean, Sharon, you ran for president. Either your teacher association, your teacher union, but there are people who wake up and go to sleep every morning who are involved in state politics, who are involved in lobbying. Some even work for PACs. So when someone says, wait a minute, you already have someone advocating for you, and you're saying, yes, but we want to do it, where do you see the gap between what you have and why you ran? We'll start with you, Chris. See your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. What I came to realize when I was, and we were all involved in some sort of advocacy before we decided to run for office, is that in the education sector, there are good intentioned policymakers, good intentioned folks that work for organizations, and they're putting together policies which they think are in the best interest of kids. They're not trying to hurt people, sure, but they don't understand the implications of those policies when they're put into practice in a classroom. Okay. And so, one of the motivations to get involved was to say, I think that I can translate between policy and practice. And we learned, we built the skills as teacher leaders through those state teacher of the year programs, where we're put in front of the media, when we're talking to local or state or federal legislators. Some of us have been asked to sit at roundtables at the White House and the U.S. Department of Ed. So we built those skills, yet we were still teaching. And so it's not that like an advocacy organization or a lobbyist wants to cause harm or do wrong. It's just they have a one-dimensional perspective, and being able to go back and forth, I think, is what has helped us all to make significant change in public education.
I want to hear from Sharon and then Jeff, because I see a lot of head nodding.
Right, right. So I think that what's fascinating is the time during my first term, it was 2010. And that was the height of what, I hate to say this, but the anti-teacher movement. And I was very blessed to go to Berlin for the International Teaching Summit. And the problems were actually universal. The problems that we're facing educators in terms of what people thought we did. And Chris is right. The piece that was missing was having a credible voice, the credible voice of a teacher who has been humbled and honored with this recognition, to be the person who is sitting down across the table from someone who is trying to do what they think is really a good thing for kids. And Chris is right. It's not that they're ill-intended. They're not. And I think when you realize that, you sit down and you have a conversation with them and ask them, what is it you want to solve here? And that was the best way for me to get in the door. Tell me what you want to do with this bill. What is it? What problem are you seeking to solve? Okay, now that I know that, why don't you come with me and let's hear from people who are doing this work. Let's go visit folks who are doing this work. And in Utah, I don't have to tell you what color we are. We're red. We are as red can be. And so I had to, and being of the other persuasion, I had to really work hard across the aisle to hear them, to acknowledge them, and to say, look, we can fix this, but let's hear from folks who are doing the work on the ground. Let's hear from them. And I worked on a bill my first year that kept me up at nights. I'm telling you, I was so afraid because it was all about teacher evaluation. And I worked with Senator Aaron Osmond. And he and I spent an entire year together, along with the state superintendent, talking about what we wanted to see. It was the only bill that passed with bipartisan support. And other than this year, I think prior to this year, that was the only bill in Utah that had a unanimous support and a unanimous vote. And so Chris is right. We have to be there to build those relationships and to say, here's what it's really like, and provide opportunities for folks to see it on the ground in real life.
Well, thanks for sharing that story and giving a real world perspective. We'll turn it over to you, Griffin.
Yeah, I don't really have too much more to add. I think Christopher and Sharon pretty much summed it up. But I guess I would say that I read a statistic not too long ago that suggests that teaching profession, teachers in general, are one of the most trusted professions, even though there, are these backlashes like Sharon pointed out about anti-teacher or whatever. But people still trust us, and I think that we can use that leverage to our benefit, to the benefit of our constituents and the public, to further our mission of public education. I just want to speak to, though, something that Christopher said, which is so true, and that is, after going through the Teacher of the Year experience and having those conversations and getting that training and whatnot, going into a union hall, and I remember going in front of electricians, and I mean, literally, there's like hundreds of men there, and they're just kind of doing this, and you got to sell it. And I don't know that I would have been able to do that before the Teacher of the Year experience, but I was able to, muster the confidence to do those things and to go into, radio shows or do whatever. But it's just kind of speaking from the heart, though, I think is what we bring as educators to the rough and tumble world of politics.
So Bob, a couple of people in fact have talked about in-story and the experience. You know a great deal about it because of the role that you play. For
Mhm.
those who are watching or who will be listening, give us an overview of in-story.
Well, NSTOY is the National Network of State Teachers of the Year. We are the professional home for State Teachers of the Year and finalists after their year of recognition. And our mission and focus is on improving policy, practice, and advocacy with, with an overall emphasis on equity, and making sure that we get better outcomes. And I think as many people have mentioned, we've one of the things that came from that year of recognition and that we foster within NSTOY is this is not an organization to be satisfied with the status quo. We have tremendous amounts of growth and gains that we need to see in our commitment to marginalized students. And I think that's something that's really drilled into us during that year of recognition and that we foster and emphasize at the National Network State Teachers of the Year.
Got it. So Holly, you're in the South doing just a map connection. I guess you're in one of the right to work states in terms of what we have here. Like Sharon, you're in a pretty red state with some blue, Lake Charles and New Orleans and other places. How does either not partisan politics, but how does this play out in terms of being a state board member? And people often overlook the power of state boards. I often tell people when I was an advocate, I used to throw rocks at the Department of Education and used to go to the legislative meetings only to realize they were in session part-time. But the school board often met every month and met longer than the legislature. Talk to us about why you decided to go that route and how does that play off into influencing policy and regulations?
Well, I mean, so the context of every state is different, and I think you started with a huge part of our context in terms of being a right to work state. And so the union here does not play the same role that you'll see the union playing in some of the other states that are on the line. I'm actually haven't ever been a union member and am a Republican, and so but I'm also a teacher, and it makes for a really interesting, I think, mix. I also, there's a lot of people that I think being the state teacher of the year, they hold to high esteem and something that, people want a state teacher of the year to be able to have a voice in those policies and pay attention to those policies. And it's not, I wouldn't say the partisanship is as felt here in the way that it's felt in other places. I mean, it's real, but it's different than in other places. You have people that draw lines around people who are pro education reform and people who are pro status quo, I think is what you'll see in our state a lot. And our state board is a very relevant board. Our state board has been able to hang on to things that other states have lost because of the fact that we're the ones that hire the state superintendent of education. And so I spent some time working for the Council of Chief State School Officers, so I have familiar with states across the country and their government structures and the way they work. And I would say that I really appreciate the way that it's organized in Louisiana because, you don't have a governor or one person who's calling the shots. You have a group of people who come together and who can coalesce around ideas to make things happen for children. It's also, I think, when I stood up the first night that I was announced as the state teacher of the year, I think my perspective about education in our state compared to the reality were that there was definitely a disconnect. I knew what things looked like in my classroom, but didn't necessarily understand some of the inequities that many of our students face. And I'm sure you all know that we fall at the very bottom of all the lists that we would want to be at the top of. And we've a lot of struggles in Louisiana. We have a lot to overcome. But I believe in the power of education. And if we're able to make a difference in kids' lives when they're at school, then, we can conquer things that families in our state have struggled with for generations.
Thank you. So all of you are involved in politics one way or another. You've talked about your experience running or being elected. one of the issues that's really front page information across the country right now is not only COVID-19, but some states saying teachers will come back, let's say next month, other teachers will wait. And there's pros and cons of people saying teachers don't want to come back, teachers should be in. We know that Education Week is currently doing a count on the number of teachers who've actually died because of COVID-19. It's over 200. When constituents ask you, whether you're elected or not, how do you respond to the public when they say teachers should be in, or maybe they should wait? People are trying to understand how this works. I'll leave it open to anyone who wants to weigh in on how you've had to discuss it.
I'll start with that because we're actually in school in Louisiana, and we've been in school in Louisiana since August. And I think one of the things that is important for people to know is that there are safer ways to go about doing schooling, and our board worked with health officials to identify what those safeties are, and have been very active in supporting our school systems and putting these protocols in place. So, I mean, I've spent since August as the principal of a high school, and we have kids back. We've had kids back outside for a couple of days of virtual days. When we need to quarantine kids, we are quarantining kids. When we need to quarantine teachers, we do that too. We're very happy that the COVID vaccine is now available to our educators. That's something that our governor recently made available to educators. So, I'll be taking the vaccine next week, as a matter of fact.
Okay, thank you. Others?
I guess I'll go. In Connecticut, so there's the town I live in and the town I teach in, and my kids in my hometown have been full-time in school since September. The only time they've missed a day was snow. We had a snow day. In fact, and then in my district, I was in hybrid. Now I'm at the high school level, so there's more students. And then we went to a remote from Thanksgiving through the December holidays, and then now we're in full-time. And what I've witnessed from my standpoint of a teacher in a district and my standpoint as a policymaker that works with the Board of Education and observes what's happening in my hometown is the key to making it work is that teachers or the teachers associations that speak for them and administration just have to be in a conversation. They have to be in a solid conversation about not yelling and screaming, not pointing fingers or blaming, but just talking about like the reality of instruction. And so in my school district where I work, for example, the CARES Act expired on December 31st. And our Board of Education said, hey, look, your kid is at close contact and you have to stay home. You don't have to take your sick days to stay home with your kid. We're going to extend that as a courtesy from the district so that you can be home with your kid who's quarantined. Or if you have to quarantine and you just come off of a maternity leave and you don't have any sick days, we're going to afford you that ability because we want to have health safety in place. My district said, we're going from hybrid to all in. We know you're nervous. We're going to supply every teacher, every adult in the building, a KN95 mask for one a day for the rest of the school year. Throw it away at the end of the day because they're not designed to be used for 2 days. So that's the teachers sharing their concerns about their health and their families. And that's the Board of Education listening and respecting those concerns and saying, we're going to meet you halfway. We're going to try to help you feel safe. Now, are there people that still get angry and upset and scared? Sure. But if you create a culture of respect and understanding between all the players involved and the families as well, making sure the families are educated and they know their kids are safe at school and so forth, then I think that's how you do it. That's how you do it.
Christopher, you mentioned two things I think are worth noting. Number one, we forget that teachers are also parents. You know, they've got other dynamics other than the 8 to, let's say, 2 or 3. Number two, when students see teachers outside the context of a classroom, they're often shocked. I remember one of my 5th grade students seeing me at a store, and she looked at me, what are you doing here? Shopping. Not in class. So thanks for providing a local perspective on this. Anyone else want to weigh in on this?
I just want to add that we, NSTOY did a survey of our members to make their perspective. And I think that's really important to make sure that as districts do things, that teacher leaders and teachers are engaged in that process. And one of the things we saw was that a number of states, a number of districts really had not engaged with teachers or teacher leaders in that process. And so if you come into things with low trust, that's a challenge. I think another big issue was there was kind of this political belief that, well, we're going to put everyone back no matter what the conditions are, and everyone just go in. And so we surveyed our members, and we're like, and things that we didn't think we'd have to survey for over, but yes, 98% of our members thought that students should be wearing masks and teachers should be wearing masks when we go back. There should be adequate ventilation. There should be based on science and not on politics. But I think those things are really there. And even the Biden administration, announced that they want to see all students back in class within 100 days of since inauguration. And Ann Story's recommendations to the administration is like, yes, we think that can happen. And at the very least, need to prioritize teachers' vaccines. And that hasn't happened in all states. It's getting closer, but just building trust in meaningful ways and engaging and involving teacher leaders is really important.
Email me a copy of that survey, and I'll make sure that we tweet everything out on our site.
Thank you.
Sharon?
Well, I can't even tell you how much, Chris, what your words absolutely just resonated with me. And I think that's been the most difficult thing of living in America for the past years. And is that there is such a political divide that it makes building a bridge of trust and communication very difficult. But we did that in Utah, and the governor prioritized teachers first for vaccines, and they're almost all vaccinated. We've had some setbacks here and there, but coming together with mutual respect to make sure that we were all heading in the same direction of wanting kids back in classrooms. That's what teachers want. That's what they wanted as parents too. We all know that. But that mutual respect and that trust, I think, is the hardest thing we have facing us right now moving forward in this country, because we are so divided. So anytime we as teachers can get out in front of that and be those agents of change and being the change we want to see in public education and in governance, I think we'll make a difference. But Chris, that just hit the nail on the head. So thank you for sharing those wise words with us.
The opposite perspective of what Chris had to say, there are probably too many states that did not build that bridge of trust. I think all teachers, we've been back. My school has been back since September, but across Arizona, it's pretty hit and miss. It's left up to local control, which I actually very much respect. But we weren't given nearly enough resources to go back safely. Like, I happen to live in a school where we just, because of the surrounding community, we were able to make it work, but it was not something that could necessarily happen across the state. I mean, you really can't put 38 high school kids. I mean, our class sizes are busting at the seams. You cannot put 38 kids in a class with no ventilation. Our buildings are old. We don't fund buildings. We don't fund teachers. And I think that has been really frustrating for teachers in Arizona. And I'm sure there are other states across the nation where we're like kind of demonized, like go back, get in the classroom, and yet not given the tools, the funding, the resources to do it even remotely safely. Like now it's different, because I will, thank goodness, Arizona did prioritize teachers. So I think I read somewhere that somewhere around 70% of us have had the vaccination. I think things now are going to change, but through the fall, without the resources, because teachers wanted to be back. We know that's what our kids need. That's what we want and what we need. But in a lot of, probably most of the state, that just really wasn't possible with the resources we were given, or really the lack of resources. Like, I'm like, you get a mask every day? Like, that's just given to you? Hello, like, come on, that is like, seems like that should be just happen, but I'm here to tell you it doesn't.
I'm glad you mentioned ventilation, because people often think that all schools are ventilated or have air conditions. I grew up in Los Angeles, so we didn't have an air condition in our school building. When I moved to the East Coast, I understood why we needed a heater, or went to first grade for 1 year in Lake Charles. I understand the importance of an air conditioner. But we think that all schools have this, and that's just not the case. Some of it's driven by when schools were built. And in some areas that are growing, a lot of school construction. But in areas that have lost a lot of populations, there's a lot of investments going into that point. Anyone else want to weigh in before we go to the last question before we end? So we're toward the end now, and just want to give each one of you an opportunity to provide some closing thoughts. You've talked about politics. Well, I guess for you, Chris, we have a new leader at the federal level who is, from your neck of the woods, and who's a teacher. In fact, he's bringing in more experience in classroom teaching than all previous 10 secretaries combined. And so that's going to be a good nod. And in fact, Sharon, I wrote an op-ed when Yo and Lily, I say Lily, the teacher, when she was under consideration, I actually wrote an op-ed about why Biden should teach, why he should pick a union president to be education secretary, even though it challenged some of the things that I thought about school choice and other things. And so we're now at a point where you could just provide in a couple of minutes some parting words on what we as people who aren't in the classroom, and if they're in the classroom, who've never decided to run for office, what's one big thing we can do to be helpful to you in your role, independent if you're an officer or not, because you ran. And so you know some things that we don't. And so I'll start with you, Bob, some thoughts that you have that you want to share with us.
Yeah, I think there needs to be a lot more educators running for office of all political persuasions. I think we just need a lot of teachers. And I think you had a question earlier about, what about people who feel like, oh, maybe it should be someone else. And I'll just say, when you step into the ring, there's often a lot of doubt. There's a doubt by the party on the inside because it's not traditional. There's doubt in other places. But as a teacher, you face challenges and you've overcome them time and time again. And so you outwork, you just stay very persistent and you find ways. I had a lot of doubt, and there's here in the Capitol, I heard some feedback like, yeah, we don't really think, I think he's going to probably drop out. And over a few days, I put 800 phone calls into Juneau, and then that story stopped. And I think also getting advice is really important, and listening to that advice, particularly if you're paying for it. I had people who sat me down and said, are you willing to, when it gets really hard and you're not raising money, to make phone calls and raise money? Because if you're not, I'm not going to volunteer for you. I'm going to take up crocheting or biking or something. And realizing that it's going to you get a splash in the paper, you're on the radio a few times, but you've got to raise money. You've got to put these things together. And I think it's hard, but it's also really fulfilling. I go back and read Team of Rivals with Doris Kearns Goodwin. Yeah. I was 80 pages in that book, and I'm like, there is no way this guy becomes president. I don't think he's going to live another 10. And it was just amazing. And he became president. And January 6th was a date that our democracy was under attack. Every time a teacher runs for office, for public office, and speaks out, that's an act of strengthening democracy. And it's a great experience. I'm a better person because I ran for office. I never actually joined the Walker-Malott administration for 2 years. I went directly from the classroom to the Alaska Department of Education as a division director with oversight of school improvement, health and safety, teacher certification, and accountability. And that was kind of unheard of. And when I went there were some doubts there, but you build trust and people connect with you. And every time there's a doubt, the thing I'd always say is, what do you want? I mean, teachers deal with in nonpartisan ways all the time in their classroom. They build trust. They do all these wonderful things. Don't you want that in your elected officials? So I'd say everyone who's thinking about not running for office, I just ask you to reconsider. I think it's a great experience.
Thank you, Bob. Chris. Sure.
Yeah, sure. If we really want to improve outcomes for kids, if we want to take that to the next level, we need more translators of policy and practice, and that means we need more educators in government, whether it's the local level or the state level or the federal level. And one of the things that teachers are great at is they're great at talking about their students. And when they share what their students are doing, when they share what their colleagues are doing, when they recognize the accomplishments and the significance of those accomplishments at the town hall or at the state capitol, people understand more about what's going on in public schools. And when those same people are in the teacher's room and they're talking about the accountability policies and the budget constraints, and they're speaking to their colleagues from that position of, hey, I'm here with you doing it, and I'm trying to make things work best on the state level, you get more out of your teachers. And it's teachers that are involved as translators of policy and practice foster a mutual respect and appreciation and understanding of what's best in public education. And it's a work in progress.
Mm-hmm.
There's good days and bad days. There's tough days. But ultimately, teachers that are policymakers make the most impact in public education and ultimately improve outcomes for kids.
Thank you, Christopher. Christine, your thoughts?
Yeah, there's been so much good stuff said already, and I agree with all of it. I think that, I coming back to something Holly said a while ago about a seat at the table. It's different in other states, but I can speak for Arizona that, if you're not at the table, the chances are you're on the menu. And I think that kids and teachers have been basically on the menu. I'm a big advocate of getting teachers to run for office. I mean, if you think it through, we have a skill set by nature of being teachers. We work with anyone. We work with the 13-year-old kid sitting in the back of the room who wants nothing to do with you, who does not even want you to like them. But you know what? We like them and we make them feel that they know we like them. I mean, it's that ability to work with anybody of any background, any political persuasion, I mean, anything going on, that carries over into the political arena, where you are now faced with working with people who maybe don't really want to be worked with, but that's what teachers do. And I think that having more teachers run, as many as possible would be fabulous, because even if you don't win, you do learn a lot, and you're able to raise the dialogue, you're able to raise the conversation, and that is so important, and just can be a game changer in itself. I mean, people who lose races can change everything surrounding them. So yeah, I would leave with that. And I would also say that, what I'm doing, teaching and serving, although my principal is working with me, I only teach 2 classes. I highly recommend, if there's any possible way of doing both at the same time, to do it. Because when we're talking about the pandemic at the Capitol, I'm living it. I'm able to contribute in a different way because I am living it. And you can't really know exactly what it's like unless you're living through a pandemic and teaching. And the fact that there are tech difficulties every single day, and trying to explain that, kids getting dropped off of calls if they happen to be hybrid because we're in person, but kids who are quarantining are virtual. Yeah, folks out there, run for office. It's super hard, but it's also super rewarding.
Thank you, Christine. Sharon, your thoughts?
I've done training across the country for teachers to encourage them to get into public office. And I start off with, I want you to think about your classroom for a minute. What do you have total control over? What in your classroom is void of any political influence? And we start off with that conversation. And what we usually come down to, because I started teaching in the 70s, folks, yes, the 70s, is the color of your bulletin boards are about the only thing that we as teachers have control over that isn't influenced by politics. And just because you're not interested in politics doesn't mean that politicians aren't interested in us. And so it is incumbent upon us to lead from our classrooms. I'm looking at you all and so proud of the fact that many of you are still in a classroom and leading from your classroom. I think we have to provide opportunities for teachers to develop relationships with policymakers. You can do that through your association. Every Friday during the legislative session, we had Educator Day on the Hill where folks would come up, they'd take their own personal leave days. They'd come up, we'd talk to them about the issues that we were facing in a right to work, very conservative state. And we would tell them how to talk to a legislator, how to build a relationship. And that I would just reiterate, if you want to be the voice of expertise and bringing credibility and credible best practices to the classroom, that has to come from us. That has to come from us.
Thank you. Jeffrey, your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to try not to sound redundant here and repeat the wonderful points that you guys have made already. 2 points, though, I would say. Number one, make sure, do a self-reflection of your personal life. Make sure that you are, in fact, in the right place in your personal life to run for office, because I can't stress it, and I think the other panelists said as much. It is a strain, to say the least, on all of your relationships that are important to you. And I will tell you, and I'll just be honest about it, I was the worst husband, and I was the worst father, and I was the worst teacher of my entire career running for public office, because it just takes everything out of you. I'll run again, but it'll be when my kids are grown, when things are in the right place. It wasn't the right time for me. And I think, I deserve to lose. The other thing that I would make, and I'm just going to echo with Christine on this, because I think she made an excellent point about being able to work with everybody. That's called moderation. And it's something that's sorely missing in the political conversations that we're having right now. Even in I can only speak to my state of Nevada. I don't know what's going on in your states. But our, conservative Republican Party is split. The Democrat Party is split, and there are radicals on both sides. And there are very few voices in the middle. And those are generally, right, the teacher voices, the more moderate voices that are saying, hey, look, let's come together and reach sensible compromises and solutions, because we're solution oriented. That's what we do. So I think that you're right. We need to have more teachers in office to reach those compromises and those solutions.
Thank you. Holly, your thoughts?
So many. So I'll start with, if you've ever thought about running for office, you should do it. It is an incredible life experience that has brought many blessings to my life. But if you don't want to run for office, I completely understand. And I echo the point that you need to make sure that your personal relationships are in a good place, because it doesn't just take a lot out of you as a candidate, but it takes a lot out of your family and your friends. The other thing is, I think it's important for us to encourage educators to run for office. I said it earlier that I wouldn't have run for office if people wouldn't have encouraged me to do it. And so maybe you're not the one to be the candidate, but you might be the friend to whisper those words of encouragement, or even sign a check. And I can tell you that there was no campaign contribution that was too small for me, because I know when somebody made a contribution that they were going to actually show up and vote for me. And that, you think of it the same way you think about tithing, right? Is that you give what you can give. And for
anything anybody ever gave, whether it was money or time or prayers or words of encouragement, it all matters. And all of our candidates need it, as you've heard today. I think all of those are important. And I think it's important just to talk about how being a public servant has made me a better educator. I know the people on this call and educators in general are always trying to become better at what they do. And I wouldn't trade what I've done because I know that it's making me a better educator. I understand the bigger picture in a way that would not have been possible had I not been in the seat on the state board. And so I highly recommend it to anybody who's ever thought about running. I highly recommend it. But you also should understand it is a very difficult life experience. But some of the most important people in my life I would not have met. You mentioned Lake Charles. I have some people, I call them my three wise men. They're older Black men from Lake Charles who give me a call every now and then and say, Holly, you need to get on this. And if I wouldn't have stepped out, they would not have ever come into my life. And so I just highly encourage anybody who's ever thought about it, go for it.
Thank you. Well, Bob, thank you so much for what you do. You talked about the importance of the arena. That reminds me of a speech that Theodore Roosevelt delivered in Paris, and it's actually called The Man in the Arena. And he talked about the importance of people who sit on the sideline and criticize people, but they don't know the love and the brutality and the blood that comes along with being in the arena. And even if you don't win, at least you know the taste of something different because you were in the arena. I want to thank you, Christopher, for talking about the importance of translation. We often forget that when we read about the story of Babel, that maybe things could have been different if there was a translator. And there's so much babbling going on right now in politics as it relates to education. Yes, maybe if we had a good translator, that would have made a difference. Christine, I like if you're not on the table, you're on the menu. In fact, I use that with some regularity. And you've also shared the importance that we've got to prepare teachers and lawmakers to be at the table, not only to read the menu, but to be able to decipher the difference between dessert, a starter, the main meal, what's kosher, what's vegan, and otherwise. And so that's important as well. Sharon, you talked about the importance of not only getting teachers involved, but understanding the importance of commitment. I mean, this isn't a fly-by-night endeavor. It's something you've got to do. And so I want to thank you for that, and particularly from the state level role in which you speak. Jeffrey, you remind us about your personal journey, and thanks for sharing that. When we talk about teachers and we talk about politicians, we talk about them as human beings, as if it's a subject. And when I hear your story, Jeffrey, I hear it's a human being. That is a human. The being is the verb. Being maybe not a good dad, maybe not being a good husband, not for the wrong reasons, it's because you're trying to change the system. So reminding us that if you decide to do this, you're going to understand human being and humans being. And I want to thank you, Holly, for your work in the state where you're talking about, yes, we should run, and the importance of being an encourager. People have to speak truth into your life, and sometimes they'll plant seeds. Some of those seeds will grow on fertile ground, some will not. The 3 African-American men you mentioned in Lake Charles would have only been something swirling in the wind had it not been someone whispering to you and you saying, I think I'm going to step out. And so this has been a very good conversation, not only for me, but those who are watching and those who will listen, because you have talked about the reality of deciding to step out. Some victorious by being elected, some not being elected, but still being a victor because you've influenced how people think about it. And so with that, thank you for sharing your story, both personally and professionally. Again, my name is Gerard Robinson. I'm with the Advanced Studies and Culture Foundation in Charlottesville, Virginia. Thank you for joining me to listen to people who are educators who are involved in the electoral process. Thank you for what you do, and I look forward to the next conversation. Take care, everyone.